Your Grace, the Duchess has delivered a marvelous baby girl." Quietly, as if fearing wrath, the courtier spoke, bowing low before Philip I. The Duke slowly lifted his eyes from the parchment he was studying and cast a cold glance at his consort, Eleanor, a girl. His voice carried such contempt, as if the daughter's birth were a personal insult. "Another one. A son is needed for the throne," he muttered, turning away, "and a girl is only good for marriage alliances." Adele of Languedoc, an infant born in April of 1464, not yet aware of her curse, slept in the cradle, while her destiny was already being woven in the shadows of dynastic intrigues. For Eleanor, that moment was the bitter beginning of motherhood. She already led a quiet, almost secluded life in Riviere Castle, far from the noisy balls and court intrigues. But now her husband's coldness felt like a wall of ice. He preferred to live in another residence, visiting his family only out of necessity. The Duchy of Languedoc in the 15th century was a battleground, where crowns were won not only by swords, but also by marriages. Philip I, nicknamed the Spider for his cunning, dreamed of a son who would strengthen the throne. After 3 infants had died, and an elder daughter, Marie, was born, Adele's arrival was a profound disappointment. Her fragile body, marked by rickets, a disease that afflicted many children of the 15th century deprived of sunlight, made her unattractive in the eyes of the era. Her spine became curved, her gait a limp, and her face, lacking grace, elicited pity and whispers among the servants. "She won't survive," the ladies-in-waiting whispered. "With such an appearance, she will bring no benefit to the throne," the courtiers sneered, careful, however, not to catch the Duke's eye. Philip, whose face, etched with wrinkles, was not handsome, saw Adele only as a tool. "She is not Marie," he told his confidants, praising the older daughter's intelligence. "Adele is only fit for an alliance." His plan was cunning. Barely a few years old, the father betrothed her to her second cousin, Guillaume of Gascony, heir to a powerful branch that threatened the Languedoc throne. The decision was dictated by calculation. This branch of the family had a claim to the duchy's throne, and the Duke feared it would eventually become a threat. An alliance with Adele, who was, in his opinion, weak and unable to bear a healthy heir, was the perfect way to weaken the Gascons' claims. At the age of 5, her father sent her to La Pyrrole Castle to be raised by his cousins, François and Anne de Saint-Étienne. The couple had no children of their own, and they treated Adele with a warmth and care she had never known from her birth father. It was here that the girl received a good education, absorbed the basics of etiquette, and delved into religious teachings. At La Pyrrole, Adele grew up in silence, surrounded by books and prayers. Anne taught her Latin, poetry, and history, but the girl's soul yearned for faith. For hours she stood before the icon of the Virgin Mary, her weak hands clutched the rosary. "Have you chosen me?" she whispered. "But for what purpose?" Legend had it that at the age of 6, she heard a voice. "You will found an order in my honor." These words became her light, but the shadows of her fate were gathering. Philip I, living away from his family, rarely remembered his daughter. "She is my pawn and will serve the crown," he said, signing the decree for her betrothal to Guillaume of Gascony. In 1476, when Adele was 12, the age permitted by the church for marriage, her fate was sealed by the marriage contract. News of the impending marriage reached the groom himself, Guillaume of Gascony. Upon hearing it, he flew into a rage. "I am being tied to that dwarf." He threw a goblet against the wall. "I will not spend my life on a pitiful offering from the Duke." But the monarch's will was law, and the young man's protests were meaningless. The wedding at Châteauneuf Castle was lavish. Banners with lilies flew over the towers, tables groaned with food, and music flowed like wine. But for Adele, it was a day of humiliation. Guillaume of Gascony, a 14-year-old youth with an arrogant gaze, saw her for the first time and clenched his fists. "And this is your daughter?" He threw at Philip I. His voice trembled with anger. The Duke smirked. "She is your wife now. Accept it." Adele, in a gown of blue velvet, stood before the altar. Her eyes were full of tears. "I am not beautiful," she whispered, "but I can love." Guillaume, blazing with fury, turned away. When the celebration ended, Guillaume of Gascony, unwilling to share his life with her, sent his young wife to the distant La Rochelle Castle. He avoided her, as one avoids a dangerous disease. "You are my prison," he said, slamming the door. Adele fell to her knees, and her rosary clattered on the floor. "Virgin Mary, give me strength," she prayed, but her heart already knew that her love would be unrequited. Yet, even in separation, Adele continued to consider herself his wife. She prayed for his well-being, believing that one day the ice in his heart would melt. Duke Philip I, pleased with the execution of his plan, did not even try to interfere in their relationship. For him, Adele was already a played card, and her personal suffering was irrelevant. The years after the wedding passed slowly for Adele, like a viscous river. She lived in seclusion in the castles her husband allocated to her, only to keep her far from his life. At first, she tried to establish communication, writing long letters to Guillaume of Gascony, telling him about the household, the maids, her prayers, and how much she missed him. The replies were rare and dry, and soon ceased altogether. Rumors circulated quickly in ducal circles. Everyone knew that Guillaume had long been captivated by the court beauties, and did not even hide it. He accompanied them to balls, showered them with jewels, and only remembered his lawful wife when formalities had to be observed. Adele, meanwhile, seemed to find solace in faith. She spent much time in prayer, helped the poor in the nearby villages, and ensured that her servants did not oppress the common folk. But deep down, she still hoped that her husband would change. Sometimes, standing by the window and looking at the snow-covered gardens, she imagined Guillaume arriving unexpectedly, entering the hall, smiling at her, and saying, "I have returned. Forgive me." But these dreams were as fragile as the icy patterns on the glass, melting at the slightest touch. La Rochelle Castle, surrounded by forests, became her prison. Guillaume, obeying the Duke's order, visited her, but his visits were rare and devoid of warmth. "You must bear an heir," he would say. His voice was like a command, but his touches were cold, and his eyes avoided hers. Adele, despite the pain, looked at him with hope. "If I give him a son," she thought, "he will see my soul." But her body, weak and barren, could not give him children, and this became her curse. Lame and stooped, she was a shadow in the eyes of the world, but her heart burned with a love no one accepted. The court whispered, "She is the Duke's failure." In 1480, Guillaume fell ill with smallpox. His entourage, fearing contagion, fled, leaving him in a fever. Adele, despite her weakness, came to his chambers. Her hands trembled, but she changed the compresses and prayed by his bed. "You must not die," she whispered, touching his forehead. Guillaume, pale and weak, looked at her with surprise. "Why are you here?" he croaked. "Because I am your wife," she replied. Her voice was soft, like candlelight. She cared for him day and night, risking her life, but her heart sang. Maybe now he will see me. But the miracle did not happen. After recovering, Guillaume turned away. "You have performed your duty," he said, leaving. His words were like a slap. Years passed, and her loneliness grew. Guillaume spent time in Gascony, surrounded by peers and mistresses, while Adele remained in La Rochelle. Her days were filled with prayer and books. She read the lives of the saints. Her favorite was Christina of Siena, whose faith moved mountains. "I can be strong too," she thought, but her heart was breaking with pain. The court looked at her with pity. "Poor princess," the ladies-in-waiting whispered, but Adele did not want their pity. She wrote letters to Anne de Saint-Étienne, sharing her sorrow. "I love him," she wrote. "He sees only ugliness in me." In 1483, Philip I died, and the throne passed to his son, Robert VII, Adele's younger brother. Her life in La Rochelle did not change. She prayed, cared for the sick in the villages, and gave alms. Her faith in the Virgin Mary grew, and the voice she had heard in childhood resonated ever louder. "You will found an order." She dreamed of a place where women could find peace in the service of God, but marriage still held her in chains. Guillaume, increasingly distant, did not hide his contempt. In 1498, the duchy plunged into mourning. Having hit his head on a doorway, Robert VII, Adele's brother, died. By right of succession, the crown passed to his cousin, Guillaume of Gascony. Adele received news of the Duke's death early in the morning, when a messenger in a dusty cloak rode into the castle. He bowed to her and pronounced, "Your husband is now the Duke of Languedoc." Adele's heart beat faster. She understood this was a chance, for now, as Duchess, she would be near him, as befits a monarch's wife. Perhaps the grandeur of their new position would change his attitude. She traveled to the capital, to Durance Castle, where the new Duke's solemn entry was to take place. But the meeting she had so awaited was a blow. Guillaume II, as he was now named, greeted her coldly, almost hostilely. He was already openly telling his close circle that he intended to annul the marriage. He claimed that the marriage had been forced, that Adele was physically unable to give him an heir, and therefore the union was meaningless. A long and painful process of marriage annulment began. Guillaume II, appealing to Pope Clement VI, accused Adele of barrenness, close kinship, and coercion into marriage. He was willing to put up with an unattractive wife if she could at least bear him an heir. But 22 years of marriage had not brought success. The cruelest part, he claimed that their union had not been consummated. "Her ugliness repulsed me," he lied before the tribunal in the capital. His words were a deep wound. According to Guillaume II, he could not lie in the same bed with his wife because of her unattractive appearance and terrible odor. That was why they had no children. For a young woman, this was public humiliation before the entire duchy. Yesterday, she was called Your Grace, and today, her very existence was being erased from court life. Adele stood before the judges in a simple dress. Her stooped figure seemed fragile, but her voice rang with strength. "He was my husband," she said. Her eyes shone. "I can name the nights when he shared the bed with me. I am not beautiful, but I was faithful." She spoke with dignity, listing dates, her cheeks burning with shame. Adele resisted until the end, not because she dreamed of her husband's love, that hope had long since turned to dust, but because she considered marriage a sacred union given by God, and annulling it at a whim was a sin. She maintained her dignity during the hearings. Even her enemies admitted that she allowed herself neither hysterics nor tears in public. Only in her chambers, when the doors were tightly closed, did she fall to her knees before the image of the Virgin Mary and pray for the Lord to give her strength. But intrigues, power, and gold in Rome did their work. In 1498, Pope Clement VI granted the annulment of the marriage. The official reason was declared to be Adele's inability to bear children. Guillaume II immediately married Yolande of Auvergne, Robert VII's widow, the heiress of the rich Duchy of Auvergne. This marriage strengthened Languedoc and brought the Duke incomparably greater political benefit. Adele was left in the shadows, stripped of the title of Duchess, and received the title of Countess of Berry, moving to Bourges, where the walls of her palace were more modest than in the capital, but the light of her soul illuminated them. "I am free," she whispered, standing in the garden where the first roses bloomed under the winter sky. Her faith, her love for the Virgin Mary, became her wings. In 1500, she was finally able to fulfill the vow of her childhood, to found the monastic order of the Annunciation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, as the quiet voice had once predicted. Thus, the woman whom humiliation had tried to break transformed into a symbol of spiritual resilience. "This is my gift to the world," she told the nuns. Her voice trembled with joy. The life of the Countess of Berry and Bourges was not the life of a defeated and offended woman. She transformed her palace, La Tour, into a convent of the spirit. Her only love remained service. In 1500, she was finally able to fulfill the vow of her childhood, to found the monastic order of the Annunciation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It united women who had experienced sorrow and humiliation, wishing to dedicate themselves to God. Their rule was simple: love, humility, and silence. Adele herself wrote the rules, imbued with Christian charity. Guillaume II, who now enjoyed power, and Yolande of Auvergne, rarely remembered his former wife. However, he was forced to admit that the Countess of Berry managed her lands better than many men. She was allocated 30,000 gold livres annually, but Adele spent this money not on silks, but on the convent and aid for the poor. She regularly sent letters to Guillaume. There were no reproaches or complaints in them, only advice concerning the governance of the duchy. She wrote about the injustice of taxes, the need to care for merchants and peasants. Guillaume, against his own inclination, often heeded her wise words. "It's incredible," he told Yolande, "that this lame woman possesses such a statesmanlike mind." Meanwhile, in Adele's convent, an atmosphere of peace reigned. She, now Mother Superior, was a model of humility. Always vigilant, she helped the sisters in the garden, cleaned the cells, and during fasts prayed without sleep. She never wore rich clothes. Her weak body seemed to be sustained only by the power of her spirit. Pilgrims from all over Languedoc flocked to Bourges, seeking solace and advice. Nobles came to Adele for guidance. Women, for help in distress. The fame of her mercy and spiritual strength reached even those who had once mocked her at court. But Adele never responded to malice with malice. She said, "He who offended me only tested my patience, but God gave me more than I lost." In 1500, Adele's health began to deteriorate rapidly. Constant fasts, fatigue, and illnesses accumulated over the years, undermined her strength. But even lying in bed, she continued to instruct the sisters of the order, asking them not to abandon the work they had started. Feeling the end approaching, she wrote a will, giving all her possessions to the order on January the 22nd, after visiting the Order of the Annunciation of the Blessed Virgin Mary Convent for the last time. She took to her bed. On February the 4th, 1505, at the age of 40, Adele died in her cell. Her face, despite the pain, was serene, like the face of a saint. She was buried in the convent church, and soon after, healings and miracles began to occur at her tomb. Despite this, the church was in no hurry with her canonization. Only in 1955, 4.5 centuries after her death, did Pope Pius XII officially proclaim Adele of Languedoc a saint. Thus, the woman rejected by her husband and despised by the court, for her ugliness transformed into a symbol of spiritual resilience. She proved that true beauty is not in the face or the body, but in a soul capable of forgiving, serving, and loving until the end, despite pain and loneliness. Her story is a quiet anthem of fortitude, whispered by the ancient stones of Bourges, and which will always resonate in the hearts of those who seek strength and faith when the world turns away.